unmuting, recording, what have you.
Yeah, yeah. When I used to work for Otis Elevator Company, and we did a lot of Zoom meetings. We actually did Teams meetings.
Hmm.
So, and yeah, for sometimes I would forget to start the recording.
Otis Elevator Company was around for, or is around, has been around for a long time, hasn't it?
Oh yeah, since like the 1850s, I believe.
Yeah. There was a building in downtown Vancouver that was demoed very rapidly one weekend because of a city order. And at one point, I was standing beside someone who said, "Oh, see that thing there? That's an Otis elevator
Yep.
crank thing that was now sitting like 6 stories lower than it had been for over 100 years." So it
Yeah.
was, but a bright green, I guess, mechanical motor of some kind.
Right. Yeah, we had the Bloomington, Indiana. We had the factory here for from the mid 1960s until it moved to Nogales, Mexico in 2001. And then that moved from there to Florence, South Carolina. But when we had the factory here in Bloomington, they did the manufacturing for the World Trade Center
Oh, wow.
elevators, and we got the elevators that were destroyed in that
Hmm.
there to examine and see, when you stuff like that happens with elevators. And they also had the machines that were at the top, like what you're talking about, the big these giant. That's a huge building, of course, and they weren't even phased when they went down. Those things are still intact
My
because they were
gosh.
so heavy duty.
And they're just big blocks of metal.
Yeah. The and also, yeah, I used to deal a lot with the Vancouver office,
Okay.
the Otis Camper. There's a sales rep named Corey Madden. Sure, you don't know who he is, but
No,
he was a
unless that
hilarious
was a
guy.
guy beside me talking. Yeah, that's an old. Maybe I met him.
But he was hilarious. He would come to our training sessions here in Bloomington sometime. And the friendliest guy, but he had the foulest mouth.
Mm. No, you need that in Vancouver. We're a tough city.
Yeah. So you've
So
been out about shooting anything?
yeah, a fair. I had another fairly nice week with a couple of music events, and then just kind of doing some street photography. Yesterday, I went off to go to my music event in the evening, and I headed off about 4 hours early so I could just kind of do a bit of a walkabout. So that was quite lovely.
Yeah, I need to get out walking more. I mean, my wife, we have a garden out back, and my wife's really going crazy with dahlias, which of course the
Oh,
dahlias haven't come up
yeah,
yet.
yeah. Oh, they're so beautiful when they bloom. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and we get a lot of so I get a lot of shots. And right now it's the dandelions. I really love the dandelions that are coming up. Um, but that's and now it's time for me to mow those down. When I get done with this, I need to get the mower out and take care of those
Right. Enough
things.
of those. Yeah, my I have a neighbor up the block that his whole yard is just graced with these amazing dahlias every year,
Yeah.
and so just started to, they're just starting to pop up now, and it's amazing they go from basically nothing at this time of year to these absolutely glorious walls of flower. That's really something.
Yeah, she has quite a few roses, but we lost a lot of the roses because of cicadas. One of the
Oh,
fruit tank
really?
cicadas. Yeah, they didn't kill the cicadas. Cicadas didn't kill them that summer, but then when their larvae or whatever dropped down into the soil, they ate the roots. The next year,
Oh,
we started losing the roses.
hmm. Yeah, we don't get the cicadas up here, at least not to my knowledge.
It was fun when it happened, in a way. I mean, it got kind of annoying after a while, but we knew it was not going to last long.
Hmm.
It was like there were these little fairies flying around all over the place, buzzing around. Then you'd see people walking downtown. You'd be driving down the street, and somebody just be walking normally. All of a sudden, they would be going like squirming around like this because they got a cicada down their shirt or something like that.
That does not sound pleasant at all.
No, but I need to actually get out because I do a lot of my stuff I carry into the house
Hmm.
and set it up. Sort of have a big roomy kitchen, and I'll set up a platform and get light stands out and so forth.
Oh wow, so you've got like a whole movable kind of studio that you
Yeah, I've got like like a big butcher block on wheels. I can use that as a platform and then just bring stuff up next to it. It's pretty easy to do.
yeah.
And our windows supply a decent, if you've ever seen some of mine with the green background, that's just the outer back windows. So
Okay.
it still looks like it's outside.
I was the thing I've been in like I guess my garden is not yet at a very photographical moment of its season, though I have magnolias that are over top. So this is
Oh
a nice
yeah.
time of year to get them. But yesterday, I was out when I was walking, and there were all these tulip stands of tulips everywhere, and in one area because I'm under these big chestnut trees, all this light was coming in and illuminating them from behind, but against a dark fence. So it basically gave the effect of shooting it with like a totally black background with these bright flowers illuminated just by the sun. So that was nice. I have to go out and look for more of those.
Yeah, I've been trying for those magnolia buds and the blossoms backlit and whatever. I just can't seem to get, I mean, I got okay shots, but nothing that I just really feel like I'm going to show other people this. So I still need to work on it. It's not
It's
as
tricky.
easy as it looks.
I'm still trying to figure it out. I mean, last year I was getting a sense of how, I mean, it depends on what you're trying to do, but figuring out negative space if
Yeah.
you're shooting into a tree filled with blossoms is I guess the thing I've been trying to explore a bit right now. So I was doing some, right now we've got apple blossoms, cherry blossoms, magnolias, oh, just so much stuff is coming up, but all of those tree structures are so different. And it's a question of are you trying to isolate, or are you trying to kind of get a pocket into the interior of the tree to get a certain blossom, stuff like that. So it's kind of it's a cool puzzle game as much as anything else.
Yeah. We also got pear trees. They're an invasive species,
Yeah,
but
we've
they're
got some.
gorgeous. They're already gone. They're past their peak now, but just every year there's more and more of these groves of these pear trees.
Mhm. Well, they have really beautiful blossoms in the
Yeah,
spring. They're all
they're
white.
beautiful trees, but they're a pest too. They just
Oh,
take
okay.
over. So in the picture you shot with the model with the wall and the
Yeah.
shadow, was I very
Yeah.
much like that. Now, what was
Well,
the deal with that? I mean, you just
well, I'm this annoying guy who walks by in the background who saw someone doing a photo shoot. I think a couple of friends were just doing they were beautifully dressed and taking pictures of one another. They had a tripod, a camera, a reflector with them. And I just kind of walked by and unobtrusively took a shot. So I tried to make the distinction like this was not a commission. This is just a capture. But it was interesting because I still was trying to do what I did there in terms of like she was looking direct to your point in your comments. She was looking directly at the photographer, her photographer, but that wasn't me.
yeah,
So I was trying, and as I say, I can't help myself sometimes from when I'm walking through a scene, and if there's someone taking a picture of a group of people or a group of people doing selfies, that's often a pretty interesting photo in itself. So, but I try not to be annoying or get anywhere in the way of the
right.
actual photo shoot. I keep, I don't want to be someone who's, that's I think these were friends, but you see people crashing into a actual photography shoot from time to time, and that's not a good thing to do.
Did he ask you to share your stuff? The shot, your shot?
In that particular case, not, but in many cases, like that's the thing that kind of like I do a lot of street photography, but also that can very quickly flip to candid or portrait, portrait kind of mode a little bit. So if the circumstances are such and they see I've taken a picture and I am talking to them, then I will share my stuff with them. So yeah. I had an interesting just in the same neighborhood just yesterday from where that shot is. That's a classical Chinese garden that's quite old in Vancouver. It's Dr. Sun Yat-sen. So it's got these beautiful ornamental pathways and architecture and trees. So it's a really nice place to go to. But I would just down a block from there, there's a guy. who worked at a skateboard shop who had set up a little ramp on the sidewalk just in front of it and was practicing, racing down and doing some jumps. And I got actually some good pictures, but I made a point of as I was, I'd watched him do it a couple times, and he was right beside me. I said, "Do you mind if I take a couple, shots of you doing tricks?" He said, "Yeah, that's great. Thanks for asking." And then so I got a bunch of shots of him doing it, and some that worked really well from my point of view. And he made a point again of, I was showing him the stuff, and I'll send it to his shop. But he was saying it was really, really nice that you asked because, sometimes people just come and shoot. Well, sometimes I'm that person who just comes and shoots. But it was really nice to also connect with him and have a bit of a conversation and share, share something back.
And do you carry a business card around with you to give to people like that?
I sometimes do, but I probably right now the only business cards I have are to my regular work, so I should probably get something. And the actually, and because I haven't and I haven't wanted to put stuff on Instagram. Everyone has stuff up on Instagram, so you point them to Flickr and you have to kind of spell it out for them.
Yeah.
So um,
I need to
but
put some more stuff on Instagram. I mean, the quality isn't that great, and I don't like that rectangular formatting it forces everything into.
yeah, yeah. But as I say, I mean, it's one of those so like the critiques that people are offering around, I suppose doing a proper portraiture and everything. That was really good feedback and advice. And I guess I've done some of that kind of composition before, where it's an intentional shot and everything, and that has a whole different set of variables at work. But it's kind of fun to in I'm thoughtful about the fact that there are a lot of folks who think street photography has to always be, completely candid without any awareness. And I don't know that that's like, I kind of find myself liking a little bit more when at some point in the transaction, because it is transactional, the subject is aware, because that sometimes brings out a whole other dimension to the experience, even beyond the photograph, because you end up with more conversations, you talk with people, you find out about stuff you otherwise wouldn't.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, I've heard arguments saying, no, you're not supposed to pose people. You're just supposed to capture some random scene. I think
Yeah.
that's baloney. I mean,
Well, and it's
it's cool if you do that, but that doesn't mean that's the only way.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like, a lot of these rules are fuzzier than people might want.
Yeah.
But I think it's, there's a difference between a pose, and I think you can still capture candids when people are aware that you're taking pictures. So it's not a matter of just, okay, sit here, do that. Here, I'm going to bring some lights in. But for me, excuse me, for me at least, a lot of that also advocates to be pretty unobtrusive. I'm usually shooting with a fairly smallish lens, and I'm not shooting with a flash. I'm not on a tripod. I don't try to bring alternative lighting. It's just what's there in front of me with available lighting,
Yeah. And
for better or worse.
yeah. No, I'm too shy to get really into the mix because I think if you get a 24 millimeter lens and you're right in front of people, that's some of your classic best street photography. But so I'll get, shoot back at 120 millimeters, and frame the shot, wait for a scene, wait for people to enter the scene.
Hmm.
And that's kind of my shtick. Now I do have a technique that I have this kind of tool because when I used to shoot weddings, and at the end of the wedding, you would want candid shots of people at the reception and so forth. And half the people didn't want to have your picture taken. So if I would be standing, if they'd be at a table, if they noticed that, they would either, if they pose, that's great. But if they go, no, don't, or something like that, I would then get a triangle so that the same distance with someone else, I would frame that up and out of the corner of my eye, I'd see if they're got a good expression and pop over and kabam and fire them like that. So I'm wanting to try to use that with street photography. So
Yeah.
people think, oh, he's not shooting me, but then I am.
Well, and yeah, and I think the other piece that comes into it is like we I believe last week we were talking a little bit about shooting from the hip and such.
Yeah.
So I think one can do it and get good at it and kind of figure out the relationship of your framing, even if you're not looking through the viewfinder to actually frame. But at some point in time, I always start to feel a little bit sneaky. And I mean, I sometimes have had lucky shots that way, but I find that I'm kind of moving towards this kind of random snapshots as opposed to compositions. So you know, I might do that for a little bit, but then I pull back and I kind of switch it up a bit because I find more involved when I'm actually consciously photographing. That said, you know, it was interesting with I mentioned in the forum. I went to Rodney DeGrew's book launch.
Oh yeah, yeah,
He's someone was formerly a big part or contributing to Weekly.
yes, I
It was
remember.
really interesting to see his work and everything. He shoots almost entirely with an iPhone. And part of that for him is just to be quite invisible in the street and be able to photograph. And you know, he talked a fair bit and I think quite thoughtfully about, you know, what he is and is not trying to capture in terms of people, because he's shooting in a part of Vancouver where you can certainly see people who are in distress, who have addictions,
Yeah,
and there's some pretty rundown parts of the city. And you know, he also tries to shoot his neighborhood in a way that reflects his view of it, how he sees and things like that. And it's pretty grounded in him, but he is trying to shoot in a way that keeps him fairly unobtrusive. But you know, he does bring stuff up a little bit, but he'll sometimes, you know, he can do a walk, you know, by a person and you know, no one actually notices a phone. They do notice a camera. My camera is pretty small, so they don't notice that so much, but it's still there.
yeah. And one of the guys in my photography club, he has his camera. He'll shoot with his phone, but he's got a remote release, so
Yeah.
he's got a good feel for where got some practice about how to point his camera, so he's not chopping people's heads off and stuff like that. So when he walked by people, he would just let it rip, and then pick out the ones that worked. And I think that's what you do, do something, do that as like by attrition, you just get a whole lot of photos
Yeah.
and that will increase your chance of getting something good.
Yeah. The other thing is like, you know, if you're like I mentioned 24 millimeters. 24 millimeters is a wonderful focal range to use for street photography
Yeah.
and also for architectural stuff as well. It's it's well, it's technically of course wider than a 28, but it gives you just a little bit more breathing room and not as much distortion as when you get to 21, or I also have a 15. But the interest, like it's a really encouraging lens to use with scale focusing so that you really can be kind of out in the street and you're walking with this deep well of focus and you can just kind of focus on composition. You don't even think about anything else, or you don't have to. And you know, you're not necessarily getting tack sharp images throughout, but you can actually get some really, really crisp images if you've kind of dialed into how that lens images on your camera. And so it's actually quite I find it just quite wonderful to kind of focus just my attention on what I'm seeing more than anything else as I go. So it's quite a nice way to shoot through a crowd.
Yeah, and I think with the street photography, you can get away with a little bit more noise, so you can increase the
Yeah.
ISO to give it some more depth of field. And the 24 is much more forgiving than if you're shooting at 100 millimeters, for example,
Yeah.
because chances are likely somebody's face is going to be out of focus.
Yeah. Well, and that, and also, I mean, you can use a narrow depth of field with more distance, and you know, you compensate a little bit, so you
Yeah.
can do shots that way, especially at night. It works fairly well.
Now
But you
this,
know, when you're shooting at night, shadow, noise, and kind of things blurred into the background is part of the mystery of it. So
yes. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this to you guys before at one of the other meetings. You ever heard of the term street unicorn?
no, I haven't.
Street unicorn is when you get somebody that's really weird, like say a guy walking down the street with a parrot on his shoulder, for example,
Oh
or
yeah,
really wild clothes or something like that. I read an interview by this photographer who does street photography, and his specialty is street unicorns, like in New York City. You're bound to get plenty of street unicorns.
yeah.
But he would actually go into conversation with these people and then take his pictures. And he didn't use a little tiny camera. He used a Mamiya RZ67 film camera.
Oh wow.
And a Mamiya
For seven.
RZ67 is like a
Yeah.
Canon, okay? So he'd keep this in a bag and says, okay, so do you mind if I take your picture? Boom! He gets this great big thing. But he got these gorgeous photos like that, of these weird people. But just
It's funny
whatever
when
technique works.
yeah, when you said that, when I was on a vacation in Tokyo, and literally in a street filled with interesting people, there was a guy dressed in a unicorn
Oh yeah.
outfit, and I was doing I did finally get a shot of him, but not the best shot. But I discovered, or maybe it's not discovered, but there's another phenomenon. There are a whole bunch of people, at least in Tokyo and probably anywhere, who are walking around the city because they're wanting to be photographed because they have large followings of themselves being photographed. So there's this guy in right in one part of Tokyo that I took a great picture. I thought, oh, what an amazing shot I've just taken, because it was a guy who was walking like 20 little dogs at once. And so he's got this big grin on his face, and he's got all these leashes, and you got this chaotic kind of massive canine tumbling in front of him. And they were like, I don't know, Pomeranians or these little kind of strange little dogs. And visually, it's just like, oh my God, this is perfect. But since I took that shot, I've seen like 50 others. So it's so this guy is always walking through things. People are always getting his picture, and that kind of attracts attention, and up those pictures go. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah, it does sound like a lot of fun. I often thought too about, I mean, it's one thing you can do this. I bet I think it'd be harder to do is if you had a friend to
Hmm.
be a candid prop in a scene. So they do something unusual in the scene to make as a street photographer, as a street photograph. But then if you did that, you would have a whole bunch of the same people, the same person. So it sort of blow the mystery.
Yeah.
You're not really capturing something unique.
There was one photographer that I was following on Flickr, and then I lost track. I have to get back to his feed. I think it was something like rangefinder or something. But in any case, he had a knack for, let's use your unicorn term. He had a knack for finding these really intriguing and interesting folks in kind of, street photography genre. And, one I can remember was this man. It could have been shot in Turkey, but this kind of watchmaker with, a big magnifying eye and
Oh
all the
yeah.
equipment. And but then he'd have like three or four different kind of versions of that shot with different and so I started to kind of cross over to, wow, and I think he is an amazing photographer. But then I started to see some people that were short, like some kids that again were really interesting and doing interesting things. They kept showing up in different shots. And so I don't know the line between, if is he just discovering these unicorns in the wild, or is he zeroed in on some folks that he works with from time to time? I think there's probably a combination of the two. In any case, the pictures are marvelous to look at, and really lively and adventurous. So that's the kind of street kind of view. Like, I don't know if the street's a backdrop for it, or it is just part of what he's kind of found a way to image.
Yeah, that sounds like a fun, again, what works for one person, that's fine. And
Hmm.
because I remember it was back, I can't remember the 70s or 80s, some of the photography magazine. Some guy specialized in New York City or San Francisco or somewhere where he would set up a big canvas backdrop and with a sign saying, "Hey, I'll take your photograph." And people, these weird people would show up for these photographs. And he had old people, couples, teenagers, junkies, you name it. He would pose them in front of this uh, big canvas backdrop and got some wonderful images. But he was just waiting for people to come up and go, "Yeah, here, take my picture."
Yeah. Yeah.
I would imagine you have to have a street permit or something to do that, but
I don't know. I mean, I think it does vary. Certain countries have very different rules about photography in the street. But even if you are allowed to do it, again, I think social protocol should kick in one way or the other, and you should be
yeah.
thinking about, like, I, I, I don't like the Bruce Gilden style where, you pop
Oh
up
yeah.
camera in someone's face and go bash with a flash. Although it results in some pretty interesting pictures of,
Bruce Gillen's a big guy, so
yeah, a lot of interesting people who are probably a bit pissed off having
yeah.
just been like that.
Well, I think also he's in his neighborhood and they probably know that, oh, here he comes again. You
Yeah.
know, they probably
Well, and I'm
been
sure there,
hanging around.
and again, I mean, it's there's room in the world for all of these different approaches.
Yeah. But but I need to get out and do more. See, I was going to ask some questions here. Hopefully, I wonder if Han's going to be here or anybody else. Um, some very practical questions. Like, do you use Lightroom?
Yes.
Okay. Now I have a problem with Lightroom in that I've got a lot of photos. So how do you deal with, I'm sure you have a lot of photos too. So how
Well,
do you deal
yeah.
with that? Because the whole import thing just seems to be way too cumbersome for me.
Um, so I guess, I mean, I do have a lot of photos and a lot of drives of backups and things like that. And then I still, I've had the experience of I used to use Aperture,
Mhm.
and when they no longer offered that program, I had to, I've had to do a couple migrations into different platforms over the years. So that's kind of given me some strategies to try to not get too hampered by change of software. So I do use Lightroom in part because I find it's pretty easy for me to organize things or to have it work with the way I organize things. So I set my cameras up so anything that comes in on the file, I have just a date, a month and a date kind of set up, and then I populate directories with that. I can set up Lightroom so that it will just kind of do that for me, and then from that point, I'm not very good at tagging, meta tagging on
Mhm.
images. So from time to time, I get a
Me
burst
neither.
of tidiness, and then it's gone. But I am able to kind of maintain a sense of time as kind of the dominant organizing principle. In the past, I have then built some collections based around, let's say, a trip or an event or some
Right.
such thing. And that's actually a good thing to do along the goal of, sorting through images and identifying ones that are actually good or that you want for whatever reason, as opposed to having an archive of all of the images. I I um I do delete a fair number of images as I go, and I try to do that at a time when I am going through so that I don't just end up with, you know, hundreds of thousands of just images of, too many things. I'd prefer to have fewer of better ones, but that's something that is more aspirational. And, I go through and I try to clean up as I go. But with Lightroom, everything's organized by time at the core, or so I can find things by month and day. And then I have a secondary way of pulling stuff into albums, I suppose. I can't remember what the metaphor, what does Lightroom use? In the library, I can set up, different collections. That's the
Yeah.
word.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So I can use collections to do it. And then the other organizational thing that I like with Lightroom, for me at least, is even if I haven't put a lot of metadata in across the collection of stuff I have, I can look up metadata. So I can look by a lens, by a camera, and I will often do, like, I'll pull up, for instance, if I wanted to see monochrome images from my Q2M, I can just filter for those in the metadata, and then that just pulls from all of my directories. So I have some presets where I can, pull certain cameras, certain lenses, and that in time usually allows me to dial into what I'm looking for.
Yeah. Because it just seems to me that once the import process seemed kind of slow, and then I do a lot of focus stacking,
Yeah.
and some of these focus stacks will have 300 images.
Well, and I think, like, I know that when I was briefly experimenting with astrophotography, which also would be something where you would be stacking and integrating, thousands of images. Yeah, Lightroom's not a good environment for that. So I think that, I mean, what you could do in Lightroom, I guess, is the kind of, you would have access to those 300, that collection of 300 for the thing, but you're doing all your stacking in Photoshop, aren't you, or some other
A Helicon
application?
focus, you can stack in Photoshop. Helicon's a little bit better.
Right. So, like, I guess the thing that I don't know because I haven't done photo stacking is if, so you've got the source files that allow you to create your stacked image, and then you create a new image from that. So, I mean, at that point, I think interacting with your outputs in Lightroom might give you a way to kind of organize those pieces, but I don't think you would necessarily want to look at those 300
No.
um, versions again
Or
on
import
ongoing
them,
way.
especially if you go out and do 50 focus stacks and there's 300 each, and you have to import all those into Lightroom. Doesn't make
Yeah.
sense to me. What I use Adobe Bridge,
Hmm.
and I just sort of start over from scratch. I've got certain folders that I have as bookmarks on the side panel, but mostly I'll just drag a folder into a Bridge, and there I'll work with this folder, and uh, and then I don't care about what happened out with what might still be in Bridge, and because I'll know where the folder is, because I'll also name all my stuff like you said with time. I always start with uh, 2 digits for the year, two
Hmm.
digits for the month, 2 digits for the day, dash, whatever that might be. And if it's a stack, I'll have the term stack in there somewhere and then a count of the stack. And I'll put those stacks all in one folder. And if I want to work on that folder, but generally I won't even do that in Bridge. I won't look at the stack itself very often. But then I will just bring those into Helicon Focus, which will create a DNG file that I will then work on in Photoshop.
Yeah.
Although sometimes I will get into Bridge and I can go through and because maybe I want to just because one of the advantages of focus stacking is you can pick and choose your depth of field.
Yeah.
So you might not want an entire flower in focus, but maybe you want the stamens all to be in focus and then all the surroundings to be out of focus. So I can, with Bridge, I can click through and say, oh, there's where the stamens start to be in focus. Okay, here, keep going on. Oh, there's the 17th shot. That's where they start to become out of focus. I'll separate those out and do a focus stack on those by themselves. So I will look at the folder in Bridge, but they're still not imported into anything. They're still on my hard drive. And those are all, and each folder would be for that day. Like I
Yeah.
might be specific to the point where AM garden, if I start it with, 25, 04, 27 dash AM garden. Then later on, I might be walking at IU campus and I'll have the same date, and then I'll have IU campus walk or something like that. So they'd have those folders. They would all be on the same day. But it's very easy to organize that stuff. I mean, if AM, it's always going to be pretty much top of the list alphabetically. Uh, so that within a day, it can be not quite in this right chronological order, but it's not enough to mess anything up. The best you're going to do is like 5 folders that might not be an exact chronological sequence. But if you dumped all the photos into one folder, click sort by title, and there they are. They're all in exactly the sequence that it was shot.
Yeah. Well, and it's yeah, and I guess the other part of it is like there are some folks who basically advocate for never throwing anything away.
Yeah,
And I don't think that, I mean, my photography doesn't matter so much that that is a viable principle. And then I guess when you think about the type of photography with stacking or integrations, it's possible that you may want to go back and rework your vision of that resulting shot again. But at a certain point in time, you may decide that you do or do not want to keep all of those initial images.
yeah, I
You
would
might be
say
happy enough with a narrower range and you're done. Are you
right.
really going to go back and do that
And
for
you
all
don't
of
waste so
those?
much disk space if you get rid of some of it. And also, I think it's a good exercise.
Yeah.
Like here's where you got to draw the line on something. Then you learn what you actually think is good. That's
Well, and John was talking about this a couple of weeks back about like I really admired what he was kind of advocating in terms of like he only ever has 60 images up
yeah,
on Flickr, and I've been thinking a lot about that because I know, well, my use of Flickr has changed a fair bit over the last few years, but there were times where I was just dumping stuff up there as an archive. So I have maybe a couple thousand birds in flight, maybe 4 of them are good. I don't know. Uh, and over time, I'm finding that it's a lot nicer to be looking at galleries that people have created, not because they have all of their shots, but they've selected 5, they've selected 10, or in this case 60 that are the ones that he wants to show. So that kind of active selection, I think, is a really valuable thing. And there are ways, I think, programs like Lightroom allow you to focus your attention either at the level of your collection or at levels of things that you've brought into into kind of an album or into a collection that's kind of focused on a topic, an event, whatever it is that is that kind of focused intent for you. And that active selection is a good thing to do. And then there are a lot of tools in the metadata that can allow you to further, archive and have access to the things that you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah, I need to do the metadata more. I mean, I sometimes I get all fired up about it and spend like an hour and a half doing it, and then I don't do it again for 6 months. You know?
Yeah. Well, and Lightroom again, I think it will be very unobtrusive and do none of the organization for you in the background, though it will competently give you access to anything that you imported, and you can find it. But like in the Apple space, like Apple Photos is actually quite a nice environment to work on photos. But I've always found like it does things in terms of how it organizes things that I have sometimes found harder to work with. Though from time to time, my phone suddenly will present me with something that it will have done with the metadata. So it will bring, here's the pictures, here's some interesting pictures you took on this date
Yeah,
over the last 5 years.
that's a
So
lot of fun. Yeah, you're right.
those kinds of things, and suddenly it's archiving and bringing something back to me that I wouldn't have done, and I sometimes like that. It's
Yeah.
sometimes it's annoying, but it's kind of interesting that if you can harness um, insights or pathways into your pictures that are easier for you to kind of pull on, I spend more time going back and looking at things.
Now, what I'll do is, like, for example, this is just laying on my desk right now. I don't know if you can see.
Hard drive.
It's a hard drive. It's a 5 terabyte hard drive for all my 2022 photos.
Hmm.
And I've been slowly going back through my stuff after my retirement. I was surprised how many pictures I haven't actually processed yet. So, but what I will do, and these are all in chronological order, with titles like daffodils or stitch panoramas in Colorado or something like that. But what I then will do, I will when I what I then I label them, some of them as prime photos, ones that I'm serious about, and eventually I will put those into a much larger hard drive, backing it up to where I'll have all the flower photos in one
Yeah.
folder, all the Colorado photos in one folder, and so forth. Um, but they'll still have the same title. Then what I'll do is all the .ps files, which might be PSD, PSB, depending on if it's a large format, I will copy those into a folder and use Photoshop to resize the image to 25% and have a separate folder for those all in one place. So now I have all these folders in one, all these pictures in one place
Hmm.
as a catalog. So I don't have to worry about popping in different hard drives and so forth.
Yeah.
So if I want to go look for these, all I have to do is search by, uh, just to do a quick Command F search for the title. Or if I know, I can just drill into that uh, folder for daffodils and find the date. I can find it one way or another, but it works pretty well for me. And I really like having one folder with all my photos in one place. And
Hmm.
that's for my own personal use. But like what Jean was talking about, keeping it down to 60 photos, I I listened to a very intriguing interview from some photographer where it was a podcast, and he was talking about you shouldn't have any more than 20 photos to present to your customers or
Hmm.
as your best stuff. And I kind of like the idea, but I could not see a lot not having some of the photos I post up there. So my idea is to try to do the best of stuff that I like to think is my best in Flickr, but then have a much more limited like separate website, my own website. And you can do that with Photoshop, with Adobe Creative Cloud. You can have your own little portfolio,
Yeah.
like a little web page for that stuff. And that's my eventual goal. But that takes a lot of work.
It does, but I think it's a good investment in terms of refining your own kind of internal quality assurance or your internal set. Like it drives you to be a good critique of your own work. which is a beneficial thing. As you know, anytime you show your stuff to people and you start thinking about that can be a good element. So, I think it's a good thing to take on board.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm not going to cut down this. For Flickr, I'm not going to cut it down to 60 images.
No. Well, and I guess the other piece of it is like there is a way in which I've shared a lot of stuff on Flickr with lots of folks, but because I'm using Flickr just more for pictures I like that I've taken more than anything else. When I'm, let's say, documenting an event, a family or a friend event, I'm usually not putting it on Flickr anymore. I'll put it on Apple Photos, and then I'll share out more of a whole event with a group of people that way. So there's a bit of a split in the channel happening with me right now, where I use one platform for certain kinds of things and other platform for
Yeah.
something else.
But yeah, anyway, I don't think I'm going to, I'm tempted to try to use Lightroom, but I probably won't because I'm pretty happy with the way Bridge works and
Yeah,
my muscle memory and stuff like that. That's all. I'm good to go. I mean, I feel confident with being able to get my workflow going.
yeah.
So
I think that the one thing that I've worked in both Photoshop. I don't work in Bridge very much at all, but I know it's kind of the backbone behind the scenes. But I've worked with Photoshop and Lightroom for a long time, and for me, like the good thing about Lightroom is it's not as featureful as Photoshop, and the selection of tools within it are ones that are appropriate for people who are working on photographic images. So the interface and the kind of core tool set is kind of focused there. Photoshop is much broader, much more powerful, but it also has a lot of addition. Like it's you have to open 10 drawers to find the tool you want sometimes. So it's a really general all-purpose thing with a lot of power if you know how to use it. But it's sometimes far more than I need. It would slow me down in terms of the kind of things that I'm typically doing when I'm processing an image.
yeah, because that's what I usually do is just do work in Photoshop.
Yeah.
I mean, Bridge is an organizational tool, and it's great for renaming. Is wonderful for renaming and all this other. And then you can go from there to launch from Bridge to get disk panoramas, for example, to
Mhm.
merge images and that type of thing. Um, but anyway, that's and with Photoshop too. Do you ever use actions? You're talking about
I,
having to drill into things.
yeah, I have in the past. I mean, I once was telling you about like there's a pretty standard set of things that I do when I first bring an image in terms, like setting the white point and the black point and a few things like that. And I've played around with some of those settings on import do these things, but then I'm not always fully confident that it will do them. Like I find that I generally prefer to see the impact of each of the decisions as I go, because sometimes that isn't going to land me with the image I want. But I think if you're pretty confident about some aspect of your workflow, so for instance, some folks will use an action for a white balance, starting with a reference image, or they might do a certain kind of processing because they're really comfortable with the effect they want. So actions can be very powerful that way, or doing bulk action across a group of images all at once. But I sometimes catch myself doing something just as a recipe, and actually it'd be better if I took my time and did it differently for a particular shot.
Yeah. And yeah, but I'll do a lot of stuff. And I've also got a device. I want to plug it and see if you can see that here.
Oh yeah, oh, one of those things. Yeah,
A
yeah,
loop
that's
deck. I've got one of these, and you can program all kinds of crap into this,
yeah.
including whatever actions you have in Photoshop. So you can plug those in as a touch of a button. Like I'll
I've got a newer, smaller version of the same kind of deal.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I've been getting the ads for those.
This is a good setup. The dial in particular is lovely
Yeah.
for certain kinds of stuff in processing.
And also use a
Tablet?
Wacom tablet. So I
Yeah.
can have the Wacom tablet over here and I can like change the brush size with the dial and so forth, that kind of thing. But yeah, I have a standard setup, like for example, when you do focus stacking, with a flower, for example, you can sometimes get a halo around this the flower. That's not hard to
Mhm.
remove but what I've discovered is I've got an action where it will select a subject, extend it by 30 pixels, contextually fill it with, and basically fill it in with a background. Then, well, before that, I copy the layer. So I have the original one on top, and this one that's just all background is on the other one. Then then I can just select the subject after that. Then it's at this point that the action's already done. So then I can use the eraser tool and just erase out that halo. So it's a very useful. I mean, you got to be careful that you don't erase out if it's a bad selection or something like that. But you just look closely around the edges, and it just works great.
Yeah. No, I
Oh,
think, I mean, there are lots of time-saving processes that one can use.
yeah,
And so I think it's always worthwhile to dig into these tools a little bit more. I've been shocked at how good the AI assisted masking tools are becoming.
yeah.
Like it's shocking. Just
Especially the new batch. Yeah,
oh, and then like figuring out what that means in terms of, the thing like you were commenting on that picture of mine this week, like cloning out that line, which is good advice that several people gave me back in the day. I mean, that would have been a bit, easy enough to do, but it's still, it's kind of messy. And you sometimes, if you're not careful, you introduce these weird little modeled parts into an
yep,
image. Whereas now, with a single selection, which the computer helps to make, you can just do that so quickly. The other thing I like is I've been experimenting a little bit with setting up a mask based on luminance or color values, and then doing, kind of finer things in parts of an image. And, for dodging and burning and other kinds of things, that can be really, really powerful and so much easier to do than manually going through and making all the selections.
right. But yeah, there's a lot to drill into with Photoshop, and I mean, you don't even know you might not even know you can do. I
Yeah.
mean, there's so much stuff, and you just can't. You're not. Nobody's going to read the entire book of Photoshop and
Well,
really.
then I used to, I'm really happy that I learned a long time ago when Photoshop was first coming out. I took the time to learn about layers and manipulation of layers. And now with a lot of again, with the masking that it can do and the power of adjustment layers, you really can kind of, well, you can lose a lot of time kind of playing inside of an image, but you have a great deal of flexibility. And then you've talked before about so there's the kind of folks that introduce, let's say, abstractions or kind of creative elements into an image, as opposed to just processing an image. And again, I think for people who start to lean into that kind of creative expression, a tool like Photoshop is endlessly possible. It can generate lots of stuff. I'm also really impressed when I see photographers starting to play with AI tools, because they're figuring out ways to do visualization experiments that way too. And it's people are really good at seeing things and thinking visually. Some of these AI tools can be pretty phenomenal. I don't know where it leads, but it's kind of interesting to see some of the stuff that I see people produce.
Yeah, I like the AI removes objects and stuff. I think I've mentioned that before. There was a person had a bicycle tire with a tree
Mhm.
covering up two-thirds of it, and I just used the AI uh, fill, and the bicycle spokes were built.
Yeah.
And it was like the tree was gone, like it was invisible. It was crazy. However, that's only about half the time. The other half the time, it's going, well, it's not working out.
Yeah.
So then, okay, here's another one, quite unrelated, but how do you deal with dust on your sensors?
Um, I uh, I use this little doohickey. This is a basically for a sensor cleaning. This is a Pentex product, so it's a little gummy on the end, and then I've got a little sheet of sticky paper, tack paper essentially, and it is dab, 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 and it works really well. And it's dry, so it's not a wet solution. I
Yeah.
sometimes gotten nervous about wet solutions, though they can work quite well. But I've been cleaning my sensors for a long time, and so I've lost the fear of doing that. Though I avoid some of the pitfalls, like using you never use compressed air. You do it in a clean environment, better not in the field, better in a controlled place like your home, and you just take your time, learn how to see if you need it, if you've done it well, and it should work fine.
Yeah. Now
How about you?
with my Z9, it's got a dust shield. So if you take the lens off, there's a shield over the sensor. And
Mhm.
that significantly reduces the amount of dust in my sensor. And generally, what I that will do it for me is
Yeah.
just
Oh, just an airbrush. Yeah.
and the sensor is
Correct.
actually with a mirrorless camera, the sensor is easier to see too. So
Yeah.
oftentimes you can even see the piece of dust and it's boom, boom, and it's gone. And previously with my other cameras, I have a good relationship with the local camera store, at least the one in Indianapolis called Roberts Camera.
Hmm.
And if I take it in there and say, "Hey, I want to get my sensor cleaned," they'll just take it back and it's done in 5 minutes.
Hmm.
I destroyed a D70
Yeah,
sensor.
you mentioned a cat that you had. So how did that happen?
I was using some type of swab somewhere. I mean, it looked like a little, almost like a little razor or something like that. And you sprayed this solvent on there, and it was like horrible, like streaks, and I don't
No,
scratched it or what. But so
that would
anyway,
give
I'm,
you.
I'm really timid about that
Yeah.
myself.
I mean, the worst I've done is so on a rangefinder, there's a little metal roller right at the front near the lens mount, and when you mount, like if you ever look on the back of a Leica M lens, it has kind of um, a brass sloped rail, and depending on the size of that, it will tell the camera what focal length you're mounting because it basically pushes that lever back in ways to allow for the calibration of the
Right.
rangefinder to the lens. So on passing my little stick in, I accidentally brushed against that a little bit and picked up a bit of grease or something, and then it was on my sensor. So then I had to breathe and kind of figure out how to get it off. But then I was able to get it off all
That's good.
fine.
Yeah.
But
Maybe if I worked on that sensor some more, I probably get it cleaned off. But and I could have taken it into the camera store and probably they probably clean it off as well. But and
there was
again,
another.
I do pretty good business at Roberts, so I don't think they're going to say no to
Yeah.
me about it.
Well, that's nice. There used to be a product called Invisible Dust, I think, where I still have one somewhere where you had a little like an artist brush, like a camel bristle
Mhm.
brush, and then you would put it in this little doohickey and press a button, and it would spin it
Oh
to,
yeah,
to
I think I
basically
know what you.
create
I think I remember
a
seeing those.
negative charge on it, and then you would use that to pick up, and um, that is fine. I think people run into problems sometimes with the liquid ones, and on I have a Pentax K3 and it's got in-body stabilization. So when you touch the carriage that the sensor is on, you can kind of feel a little bit of give, and that's a bit disconcerting. Whereas on the mirrorless Leica, I don't have that at all. It's just ding dot 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 on a hard plane. But I think if you're careful, it's pretty hard to damage them.
Yeah. Well, that's whatever. Right. Yes. That's so I just screwed up. But also back in the film days, they used to have. I can't remember. I probably got one around somewhere. It was like a broad little brush. The brush is like about a half an inch long, and they had some type of ion emitting
Yeah,
thing, and you could brush negatives. The
yeah,
negative, because if especially negatives can dust can negatives can be really uh, sticky. They won't
yeah.
get brushed off, or they'll just come right back to the negative. But that ion thing that would just let the stuff just drop off.
Yeah, I've got back in the LP days, I have an old Zero Stat, a little negative ion generator.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, and you,
You get
you
the
and you'd go around and shock people with it. It's
yeah.
a little piezoelectric thing at the end. And I've speculated, but I'm not going to say, well, I could do, zap, zap, zap into the cavity of one of my cameras because it would just give a negative charge and then go. But then I once had a buddy of mine use he basically killed a calculator of mine, not using a a zero stat, but a much bigger electric source. But so I'm not going to start doing negative ions into the bottom of my camera.
Yeah, I got a zero stat somewhere, one of those roll brag guns. Yeah.
Yeah, they're fun. The other thing about dust now is that, again, going back to removal tools, dust removal on a image is so trivial for the most part now. And so you can do it quite easily in Lightroom or Photoshop. I made the decision I bought an old macro lens a month or so ago, and despite the fact that it had I could see it had like a dust spot or a fiber inside of the lens assembly itself. I figured that, I can see it, it's there, so it's in the images, but I can rid of it so easily that it doesn't kind of dissuade me from purchasing the lens. So there's that thing that you can do, of course, in processing. And then most cameras now will have you can kind of run it through a sequence where it will detect if it has any hot pixels, because
Mhm.
that's the other thing that sometimes happens with digital sensors, that you get these hot pixels across the array. And so if you kind of know how to run your camera through that sequence every time to time, those will get canceled out as well.
Yeah, you can
And-
run hot pixels with focus stacking sometimes.
yeah.
Especially if you have
And-
a 300 image, you got like a little firework or something going along.
yeah. And a lot of cameras now, you can run that through and it will tell you, it will image for you where on your sensor you have dust. And then you can use that to zero in on cleaning as well.
Yeah. Yeah. But also with you talking about dust, when you get do you ever do film scanning?
I've done a little bit. I've got a lot of negatives I'd like to scan, I think, but I also know how tricky that is. And like I've got a flatbed scanner, and I think somewhere I have an old film a negative scanner somewhere that but I know that anytime I tried it, it was really evident that you need really good dust protocols to do it well, or you just have to do it in build it into the post-production you need to do, because it's just almost impossible not to scan in dust.
Yeah, you can get a lot of dust if you use isopropyl alcohol or you get some of that Kodak solution for cleaning film and a Q-tip.
Yeah.
That can, especially if you have a really dirty negative or a slide. But then after the fact, I strongly not recommend using the oh I can't remember that where it removes the dust automatically when you scan.
Yeah.
Because basically all that's doing is smoothing over
Yeah, it's
the little
done.
blobs and you get these weird artifacts.
Yeah.
Because it's so much easier just to clone the dust out in post.
Yeah, I think ViewScan had
Yeah,
they had software to work with lots of different scanners, and that was their shtick, that it had all of these procedures. But yeah,
yeah. I
I
use
I mean, I
ViewScan.
think I think it's pretty much inevitable that there will be some dust that comes through. I liked John Pah's image this week, where it was a scan of a print, and you got the texture of the paper, the edge of the
Yeah,
paper, and it's kind of fun when you see that. Like sometimes when people will scan a slide or a negative, and they do the sprockets as well on the negative. It's a pleasing effect.
yeah. And I've got oh this thing right here.
Oh yeah, for slides.
This is yeah, this is slides. I've got equivalent of that for film. You slide the film in these
Yeah.
slots. And you can do this many slides at once. What's that, 12 slides
Mhm.
all at once, as opposed to shooting one at a time. That works very well. And with slides, it's easier too with a Q-tip to wipe that stuff off. It's a little bit trickier with a strip of film
Mhm.
until you get a feel for it. But and then scanning is a whole nother art of its own. Like I've told people before, you get all enthusiastic about scanning 200 or 300 pictures, and then the 301st, you go, wait a minute, this isn't wrong. I need to redo all those other photos because you can do a lot with scanning.
Mhm.
And if you do actually with, you could scan for the shadows, scan for the highlights, and layer those together and feather in the stuff to get a more realistic image, because there's not much dynamic range in film.
Yeah.
And, but then I mean, that's a lot of fuss too.
Well, and I'm still shooting a little bit with film, And rather than I don't care so much about getting prints back from the developer. I'd prefer just to get digital scans, but then this gets into a whole set of questions because some of the services now offered, multiple tiers of quality in terms of the scanned images you get back, and some of that is resolution, but I think it's also the care they take to scan. And lab scans aren't necessarily really great, so you might choose to do the negatives as well. But the whole workflow of taking a roll of film in, if you're not developing it yourself, and getting back just a scan rather than that, it's great, but it is less convenient and more expensive. So I think some folks have a little rig set up with like a bellows and a 50 millimeter lens to do slide scan directly into a digital camera.
Yeah.
That works pretty well and is pretty quick. Um, but 12 at a time is quicker.
If you have a lot of slides, I got a lot of slides and negatives too, as far as that goes. So, but I find myself not doing it because I just don't really have time because I'm working on my current digital images. I need to like budget myself an hour a day for scanning or an hour a week. Or if I did an hour a week, I probably would have had them done by now.
Yeah. An interesting question is whether like in terms of preservation, do your images have a better likelihood of being preserved if you leave them on the slide in the negatives, or if you put them into a digital format?
It depends on how pessimistic you are about the future of digital images. Because a lot of people say, well, that's all going to die. But I think the best bet is to get it scanned. And if something happens, because so many things can go wrong. You
Yeah.
can lose the film, you can rot or whatever. Digital images are probably going to be okay.
Yeah, I think it's more so what will someone do when, you have, like 17 terabytes of images on a bunch of hard drives. And, it's possible that you will continue, like, for people who have lots of images, it's possible that, you can retain those, but it's a big undertaking to have that much digital material archived for someone else to actually do anything with it after the fact.
And that's something I often wonder about too, because
Done.
I think hey, here he is.
Sorry, I'm a bit late because we had dinner.
Yeah,
A good cause.
we're just past lunch here in Bloomington, and you're not even up to lunch, are you yet, Jeff? But the future, I mean, I think my grandchildren in particular could be very interested in the images that I took, particularly images that have to do with the family and things like that.
Yeah.
And where I would love if I don't even know who the heck my great great grandparents are. I think somewhere somebody told me about one of them, one fact about them or something like that. But my great great grandchildren, they're going to have a wealth of information about me
Yeah.
because I also keep a journal and stuff like that. So, and that's all digital. I mean, I think that's stuff. I think people will look at that as they'll think it's valuable to them anyway.
hmm So I guess putting it into a format where it's organized then, becomes,
Yeah.
kind of a gift to a future generation.
Yeah. And if it's all on film, yeah, somebody's going to maybe want to scan it or something like that, but it's much less likely they're actually going to ever look at it.
How are you today, John?
Yeah, good. It's a bit hot here. The sun is shining all day.
Kind of cool here. It's the high mid 60s here.
Mid 60s. That's about
That would
20.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're about 20-ish as well here in Vancouver.
Yeah, I hear it's about 20 as well, but in the sun, could be quite hot.
It's a pleasant day out though. I kind of like it dry and cool. No mosquitoes.
No. So, what were you talking about? Family.
We were talking, we started out talking about how to, no, we were talking about street photography. That's what we started out with.
Hmm.
And we were, and oh gosh, didn't we mention something about yours photography, Jeff? But
Oh
about
yeah,
images?
we were talking last week or the week before we you were talking about how you put a lot of care into selecting to just have 60 images up
Yeah.
on Flickr at any time, and that whole kind of dedication to being selective and learning as you go and kind of adjusting as you go, and again just kind of admiring that approach as a selection probably is a really good way to pay good attention to the level of quality or the kind of work that you're wanting to produce, as opposed to just archiving everything, having everything out there.
Now,
Yeah,
do you store photos or share photos anywhere besides Flickr?
yeah. I no, I have a website which I have linked on Flickr. So from there you can go to Flickr,
Oh, I
and
didn't
I
realize. I'll have to check it out.
and then I have a from Flickr I can go to my website.
Hmm.
So and then the other thing is what I do is uh, I've with another uh, some maybe 10, 20 photographers. We have a website and everybody can go there, but it's actually more or less 10 or 20 are uh, yeah, they put photos on it sometimes. And this website is, yeah, they have a week photo, they have a month photo, they have yeah, it's about giving each other critic.
Hmm.
So
Nice.
you put a photo on it and you get critic if you want. So there are a lot of pictures from me as well, but not in order or something. Yes, on my name, but you can search for it on my name. But uh, actually, that's what I'm doing, not more. And I'm connected here with a photo club as well. But this is not a place for put. Yeah, they put photos for me as well there. It's just the whole club, but there we don't have competition or something. Just you. They have. I'm connected with the group of. Yeah, they call it black and white, but like you can you can put color there as well. And there we come together with maybe 20 people once a month, and with two objects, and everybody can send in, and then we discuss the photos with each other on the screen, not printed out. Actually, I like more printed out, but yeah, it's the way they do it there.
Yeah, I only recently started printing out my up. I mean, because I used to do it in the darkroom all the time, but that was early 90s is the last time I did it. So recently with the photography club, because we have these shows, I had to have prints, framed and mounted prints. And
Yeah,
it's a lot of fun. And that's a totally different look. It's like, wow, when you first see a 16 by 24 image compared to what you see on your computer screen, that's a different animal.
Hmm.
yeah, and if you print it out, you see more because you take time for it, and sometimes, and I don't know how it's going with you, but when you put a photo on the internet and somebody else say, "Oh, this could be different," then you make it and you put it on the internet again. But when you have a print, it's different. You look different at it, so you take your time more. And if it's not good, then mostly you are not going to print it out again.
Yeah. Well, I think you with a print as well, you're having to be mindful of the size of the print. Are you printing, little tiny guy, or are you printing a larger format? And then if it's larger format, thinking about all of the setup in terms of the resolution and the treatment. I mean, you're not pixel peeping in anywhere the same way as you are when you're looking at a screen, and people will zoom in 300% and say, well, it looks a little bit blotchy. Well, why would you do that? Because you're not going, you're looking at a print usually from about a meter away or maybe a little bit closer. So the kind of visual impact of images is different with that space in between.
And I think you with a print you have more time to look at it because you take more time to
Yeah.
look at it because yeah, it's a print, and therefore you look carefully and more, I think, longer.
Yeah, I think it's good to look at this, look closely, even pixel peep. I wouldn't say beyond 100% because just to keep yourself honest, make sure you're not getting lazy. But when you make your prints, a lot of those little defects are just gone.
Yeah.
He's very forgiving. If as long as it's not like out of focus or something crazy like that, it's there are a lot of good advantages to making prints.
Mhm.
And I think another one that I think is an advantage, and maybe goes back to some of what we were discussing earlier, is that it's unlikely that you're going to print everything, right? It'd be expensive, probably not worth it. So by the time you have decided, I'm going to print this, especially if you're printing it to a larger size, you're kind of making selections, kind of making decisions about what's actually of value to print. And I think that any time you bring that kind of selection and that critique to your own work as you do that, that's hugely beneficial. You're not going, you're not going to be as, you can throw as many digital files up as you want, but you're not going to print a bunch of large images to
Now, the
be.
weird transition that could happen though is you can have LCD screens on your walls
Yeah.
and boom, I mean, that transition, how's that going to work out? Well, it's possible that nobody will ever make prints. They're always going to be, especially if the LCD screens become cheaper.
Yeah. So I have a big display downstairs, a mural. They came out with ones just for pictures and such some years ago. And I'm probably going to buy another one in part because I don't have a lot of wall space. So
Yeah.
for me to dedicate, to a static image on the wall isn't really possible. If I want very much up. But the idea of having some screens that can display digitally, that works just fine. And I already do that. I've got like an old iPad stuck to the fridge door that is a photo album, and
I've been meaning to do that.
it works great. Yeah.
But
But it
another,
is but I think you can bring the same kind of value of selecting your work in terms of what you display there rather than just set it on automatic to pull from, well, vast number of directories.
yeah. But there's something cool though about when you get that. What I don't make my own prints anymore, so I send it in for MPix, and then it's really cool to pull that brown paper off. Oh wow, there it is. That's a real rush to get that.
Very satisfying when you see a print come back.
Yeah. But something else you mentioned about, and this is something I've often wondered about. I don't think anybody's ever heard this on the weekly, but some other critique groups, they talk about using as a criteria of how they should judge a photo. Would I hang this on my wall? Which I think that's not a bad way to think about it, but I think that's a sloppy way to think about it. I mean, there ought to be more reason than that because I love Van Gogh's Starry Night, but I'm not going to hang it on my wall anywhere, But still, you can't. I don't think that criteria is that useful. What your thoughts be on that?
Well, I immediately laughed because I have hanging on my wall down in my basement. I think I told this story. There's a ratty old electrical transformer in an alley a block away
Yeah,
from
yeah,
me that has been beaten up in so many different ways, is all dented, has been painted 100 different times, vandals with graffiti, everything. And I took an image of it that I just love, and I'm hanging it. So, it's a mundane image. Probably most people would not put it on their wall, but I like it because it has this other value too. So to say that I wouldn't hang it on my wall is only telling me that subjectively it's not the kind of thing they like. It's not so different than saying it's not my cup of tea with an image or something like that. But yeah, I don't know. I think that why people hang things on their walls have a lot to do with the picture itself, as well as anything about its proficiency and how it was shot or how it was processed.
Mhm. Yeah. The last question was, would you print something and what you hang it on the wall is more or less the same, eh?
Yeah.
Because
Depending on the
well,
incentive, to like with the photography club is we need you to enter this thing in the show. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. We have a goal involved.
but actually there are people, in my opinion, who put everything on internet. So their criteria for putting something on internet is not the same as would I hang it on my wall.
Right.
Yeah.
So you need to be a bit selective with putting photos on internet, maybe.
But
Or yeah, and where? That's okay. If you put it on Instagram, well, there are people who are putting everything on Instagram. Yeah?
yeah.
And it has to do with a lot of selfies today as well. So well, yesterday or the day before yesterday, I was here on King's Day, and all the young people, they are, especially women, they are making selfies and in the group and drinking and making pictures. That is their goal, and then put it on internet as well.
So I
But
saw in some feeds today photos from King's Day. What can you tell me more about that festival? What is it about? Don't know
it's
anything.
about yeah, in Holland it's normal every day. One day in a year, it's King's Day. They mean they nobody has to work. Everybody make fun and yeah, mostly in the morning, children are going uh, in the street selling things. Actually, people are cleaning their house and and then a lot of stuff what they are going to maybe bring to the dustbin, they say to their children, sell it in the street.
Oh, okay.
And then they have in Amsterdam there are the day before the King's Day they are marking the street. This is my place. So it's a fight for places as well.
Staking out their territory.
Yes. So this is Annie and John. So put this in the street. This is my place. So nobody can come there. And then they mostly children sell uh, their toys and things, clothes that what they don't need anymore. And well, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I didn't have any reference to the actual holiday and what it signified or what it meant for folks. But people were certainly out in the streets having fun from what I could
But in the
see.
evening, it's drinking and listening to music and things
Uh,
like that.
And that's today or this weekend?
No, it was yesterday, yes. And actually, it was the birthday of the Queen, but now it's just a day, not especially the birthday.
so probably like in Canada, we have Victoria Day, and that was for the previous Queen Victoria.
But I was thinking this is a day where everybody is happy. So it's very easy to make portraits in the street.
Mhm.
The next day, it's very difficult to do it.
Because not in the same mood.
Yeah, but you have, as a photographer, you need to make profit of it.
Yeah.
So I was there to make portraits, and well, everybody's happy, and you can do what you want, but it's not always like this.
Yeah.
So I need, as a photographer, I need to think about these things as well. When everybody is happy, it's quite easy. But the other thing is they are too happy and they want to pose for the photographer, and yeah, there you have a thing as well.
Yeah.
Which
Well,
for me is a bit difficult because this is what I don't want. I don't know how it's with you, but if are the portraits are too posed, for me it's not so. Uh, I don't have the fun in this.
Right.
So I need to
I
work more on my street photography game, that's for sure.
I find it's really fun in many respects, and a big part of it is you benefit if you're just like really aware of your surroundings. So, you rarely have an opportunity to take the shot again. Like if you're really going for candids, unposed, and just whatever comes up, you
Yeah,
catch it as it goes by, and then
you,
it's
you go on a corner and everybody is passing by, and
yeah,
or everybody is listening to the music there, so and having fun. So
yeah,
if you
it
are
just kind
there
of
for
comes together, then it's gone.
yeah.
I don't know if you'll remember this image, but some months ago now, quite a few months ago, I posted an image to Weekly where basically I'm shooting into a storefront, a clothing store, and there's this really weird mannequin there, kind of looks like a monster. And there's a guy who's in this store who's he's just turned back because he can't figure out what the hell he's looking at. And I
Mhm.
just caught it at the moment that he looked back. And so he's looking at this weird figure, trying to figure it out. And then there's another one on a diagonal back. But that all just kind of came together like that. I didn't,
Mixing. Yeah.
yeah, just in kind of the flow of the moment, that was the image. And I noticed the guy walking there and I noticed the mannequin, but I didn't notice those other things until afterwards. But that's part of what's really fun about street photography. It kind of
Yeah.
is the impulse to catch something as it's moving, and that catch is sometimes more important than framing, exposure,
Well,
focus. Even
Yeah.
shoot
you hope
first
those things
and
are there, but
shoot first and think later, they say, yeah.
yeah. And if you're prepared, you should be like you should generally be already in focus for what you're trying to shoot. You should generally already have your exposure kind of in the range of what you want. But again, it's just that moment that you're trying to get captured.
A lot of luck involved, but the more pictures you take, your luck will be better.
Yeah, but this week I was near a hospital and then I saw a nurse is over crossing a zebra. This was my ID. I think, oh, this is good. And then I waited and nothing happened. But then I was thinking, next time I go there again. So I was with my data lens. I was sitting there, and but I was always too late. So I need to go. I needed to go closer. But then, yeah, actually, it didn't happen. So you have to make effort to do your best or to think more to have the shot that you have in your mind.
Yeah, by the time you figure out, hey, this ought to be a good photo, it's done. That's already moved on to something else.
Yeah.
But you
Well,
have to
and
get
that's
the
where
pick out of camera.
and we've had some really nice street photography lately, and people will sometimes say, well, this would be worth going back to. Really interesting shot, things are good. If you have an opportunity to go back and do it again, and that's generally good advice because if you are familiar with places and how people flow through them and what's happening, you sometimes can go back and be more prepared to catch the
Yeah.
shot you hoped for the first time.
Yeah, and then you go there again, and then next time you have maybe the shot,
Yeah.
but maybe not. So you have to decide when you have the shot with what's in your mind. So sometimes I think I have it, and then I come home and then I think, oh, it's not here.
Yeah.
The lighting
And
could be completely different too. Maybe in a good way.
But it's even if it doesn't happen, for me at least it means that I'm usually out and walking around in interesting parts of the city and enjoying the crowds, and you get a sense of kind of following
it
to those places.
depends on your patience as well, because
Yeah.
if you have more things on your list, you say, well, I wait here 5 minutes and then I go more far, or I go on with my thing.
Yeah.
But if you really want something, then you wait.
Yeah, I think you need to get warmed up because sometimes you can feel like, I'm not really feeling it today. But if you just keep pushing through that, the next thing you know, stuff starts to light up.
Yeah. And I often also kind of I purposely try to be in quite different contexts. So I'll walk through different neighborhoods because I know the kind of space those neighborhoods present. And then, I'll in some places it'll be more architectural or just street photography. In other places, there might be a garden, it might be more floral, stuff like that. But switching it up just in terms of location is kind of fun to do. And then when you go back and look through the day, you kind of see the whole passage of places you've been, which is nice.
And sometimes it's like this that you go, for example, in a new street that you didn't notice before, and then, well, it's there, so you can shoot what you want. So maybe in this street you have 4 or 5 photos, which are good when you come home. But when
Yeah.
you go the next time, it could be there's nothing there. But
If it's a
it's
sunny
strange
day,
because
there are
it's
tricks you can do. Like if it's
yeah,
a sunny day, look for where the shadows are
yeah.
and see people moving in and out of the shadows, or what's going to obscure, like a lamp is going to be in front of, or shadow of a lamp over a window. Like I thought I got a pretty good shot with something like that. Just watch the shadows, if nothing else.
Mhm.
But if you have something like a place, for example, a street where you had the last time you had good pictures, then you can maybe change your time. So for go in the morning, early morning, or go late at evening,
Mhm.
or what you say, Teddy, go look for the shadows or
Mhm.
reflections or
Yeah,
uh,
reflection's a good one too. Yeah.
In the last couple of weeks, I've been at some events downtown, and so I've been out in the city, late at night, and I just love shooting on the streets at night because the variables are so different. How you're trying to deal with light is completely contrary to the day in some respects, and I'm not doing any of it with a flash, so it's all just whatever light's available, but. It's a really fun thing to do because even a street you're quite familiar with can look quite different at night. I was doing some flower photography at night along the street, and one you have to find a spot where there's enough light on the flower, but then it completely throws you into a different way of trying to figure out what a shot is when you're doing it under low light. But it's just fun to do. It kind of changes it up again for you.
Yeah, at
yeah.
night it's going to more likely to cover up distracting elements.
Well, and you have a lower dynamic range to work with
Yeah.
typically, either both from ISO and just from the nature of the light. I far prefer to shoot in monochrome at night because then it's just about the lights and shadow and contrast. But even shooting in color can be quite a bit of fun because then
And
especially if there's LEDs or other kinds of lights in the environment.
it start to look different because of the light, eh?
Yeah.
Because where the
Yeah, and
light is,
reflections and things like that can be really fun at night.
yeah.
There's a guy in my photography club who is into light painting, and he's not talking about the type of stuff where you make loops and that type of thing, but he'll find structures and use a flat, like a goes down gas station, for example. He'll set the camera on a tripod and use a flash to light up the gas station,
Oh yeah.
which is he's getting some interesting results. In fact, if you saw this, you wouldn't know he was doing that with a flash. It's
Hmm.
just like it's this off-site, out of camera light source. But you sort of have complete control over that. And he's been practicing on how to make this look more interesting for people to see. So, and I remember reading that and some photography magazine in the 70s about cave photography, where you would set up a camera on a tripod, be pitch black in the cave, but you could go around and flash. You just take and hold the camera on bulb so it's just wide open, the shutter's wide open. So you just manually take your thumb and flash the trigger when you're pointing at the stalactites or the waterfall or whatever. You do it several times. You end up with a lot of photos where there's your silhouette is in front of the flash sometimes, which I think is as interesting too. But I think it's an intriguing idea.
Yeah. There's a Vancouver photographer who does some amazing shots like that in a similar way. He'll kind of go out into rural areas and find these older buildings. And he's out there in the middle of the night doing, a series of strobed shots typically in a panorama, because he's usually stitching multiple ones together. And he's doing, basically really beautiful architectural portraits at night. And I think this guy sometimes also uses a tilt shift lens, so it gives him even, better ability to organize things. Or you see people with field cameras doing that kind of work. There's a famous photographer, well, I don't know, Douglas. Oh, I have to think of his name. There's a strip of Hastings called in Vancouver, and he did a night shot. Stanley Douglas, what's his name? Stan Douglas, and he did a whole sequence along this rather dilapidated part of the city, but he had a field camera and he did the whole street. And so I'll pull the image out in a minute, and you look at it and it's just beautifully lined up, and it's all lit at night, and it's really quite an extraordinary shot. So people who do projects like that are quite nice. I've seen people use that effect for train cars in kind of landscapes at night, which are quite dramatic as well.
And of course, you got the famous photographer with the trains where he used these gigantic strobes. The famous one at the drive-in theater with the jet plane on the screen and the train coming by.
Yeah. No, this isn't it. I've got it somewhere, but it's not that one.
But that's fun kind of stuff. I mean, it's gimmicky, but it's fun, and the results are usually remarkable.
Yeah.
Which I kind of like to do stereo photography, but not many people do that. But I'm trying to come up with my own composition with stereo, because why not take the rule of thirds and pivot it away from you or something like that? I'm still working on that, but
Well, have you ever looked at old stereo photos, like from the early, or let's say late 19th century, early 20th century?
oh yeah,
Because I bet there's a whole genre of people who are using, different kind of perspective effects in order to amplify the stereographic view.
yeah, they have what they call hyper stereo, where you actually generally, technically, stereo photography, depending on focal length you've got, should be about the same distance as your eyes are apart. But sometimes you can get, yards apart for a scene, and you get these really hyper stereo effects that are kind of, kind of fun to look at. It's both realistic and unrealistic at the same time.
Right.
And you can do that if you shoot out of a plane window. Just if you see stuff like clouds move by, just take a couple of shots, and you can get stereo images like that.
You with two lenses, Teddy?
No, well, you can if you have a camera with two lenses. That's one way to do it, and there are plenty of people who hook up cameras on a rig. So you have two cameras, like two Nikon cameras, two Canon cameras on. So then you kind of line them up in the viewfinder. So then you can fire them off simultaneously. And the advantage to that is if there's any action, that action will be frozen. Whereas what I'm talking about doing, they call cha-cha, where you take the camera and move it from left to right. Those two separate photos taken, 2 seconds, a half a second apart. So if there's running water or something like that, that gets all kind of messed up. So for people walking by.
With a tripod.
I'm sorry, what's that?
With a tripod or with a how do you say a tripod?
Tripod.
Yeah.
Yes, you can do it with a tripod. But if you do macro photography, that's best to do that with, and I've got this, which is like a focusing rail.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So where you're supposed to, focusing rail is supposed to go like this. I'll go this sideways and I'll move it, like, if you got a macro, I'm going to be moving it, like 15 millimeters one way or the other. But then when I do that, I'll point the camera so that the subject is still centered. So it's not like you're moving across, but that way the camera kind of toes in, this is how your eyes work. And I've got quite a few stereo photos like that on my website on Flickr, if you want to take a look at those, but you got to cross your eyes to see them.
And then when you develop it, it's 2 layers. And then you
Yes.
use.
I'll put 2 layers in Photoshop and then I'll just move one of them over to the right and adjust it out. And I've got an action that will do that. So I'll just paste them in 2 layers, click a button for the action, and everything will be all adjusted out to the right, left and right. You double the width of the image to get that and everything. And it's usually best to have the photos in vertical, in portrait mode, as opposed to landscape, because it's harder for people's eyes to process a wide image.
Mhm.
That's interesting.
Not that you can't do it, but especially for people that are just trying to learn how to do that with crossed eyes, the wide ones are really hard. I grew up with that, so it's easy for me to do. And some people just can't do it. I have one of my sons can't do it at all, but two of them can. And my wife has to struggle with it with the cross eye. Now you can do parallel viewing. In fact, if you see my what do you call it? The icon, my avatar, whatever my image is in Flickr, you see these glasses. Those are actually stereo viewers. So you can look at the image. If you print an image, you can see stereoscopically. But that's super gimmicky, and uh, and it's a lot of fun. But you don't, because of that complication of you have to have goggles or know how to cross your eyes. That limits a lot of people's
Yeah.
ability to view it. But you can
Not a lot
also
of.
take an image like you take like looking into a bunch of trees. It looks like a crappy image. That's the most god awful image I've ever seen. But if you do that to a bunch of trees and you take a stereo image, all of a sudden it opens up and you can see beyond, you can see through the trees. It's a totally different experience.
It's a kind of 3D.
Yeah.
3D.
Yeah.
But yeah, 3D is working like this as well, huh? But with different colors, I think.
That's one way to do it. Yeah, sometimes they have different colors, red and green, because you have lenses, they have a red and green lens. So you kind of see the opposite of what the color is you're going to view, and your brain will automatically merge the
Mm.
image.
And with some of the 3D TVs and such, they also can do it sometimes with there's a frame rate that they play
Yep.
with, and the lenses are kind of tuned to kind of see one or the other. So
Yep.
again, they're just able to do that offset.
And you've also got like polarizing
Yeah.
goggles, like a lot of 3D movies will be like that. The best 3D movies are ones you're talking about where they actually have an active frame rate
Yeah,
going.
it's the active frame. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, for some people, it just doesn't work at all. They can't collimate.
No.
Uh, Here is a company. I don't know if it's in America, in America as well. It's called IMAX. You understand?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
IMAX, yes.
They project in a round screen. It's a ball.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's OmniMax, actually. So
Omnimax. Yeah.
yeah. So IMAX was a Canadian company initially. So they came out with the format first, and the early ones were I can't remember how many degrees, but you'd see these huge screens that kind of wrap around, and then they've kind of expanded that further with the OmniMax format. Most city or a lot of cities have them. We've got a
Yeah.
couple.
Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago has an OmniMax theater. There used to be one in Indianapolis, uh, but they tore it down. They got this dinosaur diorama now with these animatronic dinosaurs instead of the theater.
The projectors for those IMAX movies are quite something, and of course the film stock is these
Yeah,
massive. I don't know the dimensions, but it's quite a lot of technology going behind it all.
yeah. If you go to most of the IMAX theaters, they usually have a picture window you can look and see the projectors. So one of these days, I don't know. on my photography club, I've got a bunch of extra glasses. I'm going to have to print out a bunch of those 3D photos to take to my meeting because people have been curious about it, but they're not that interested in crossing their eyes.
Mm.
So one of these days I got to bite the bullet and just make a whole bunch of prints and take over there and say, hey, everybody, check it out. Because I got a bunch of glasses ready to do that. So
Here in my photography club, there are a lot of people, but very old.
that's
In
the
your
same
club?
with our club. Catherine talks about that too.
Yeah, they had a trick last time they told me. Uh, there was another photography club with a lot of old people, and they said, "Well, we have to do something because after a few years, maybe 10, 20 years, this club is not any longer." So they put an advertisement in the newspaper, uh, and they said, "Make your best photo of this town, and you can win a year photo club." So if you win the membership of the club for a year. And they had a lot of people who sent in their pictures. And now they are growing with young people.
We've got a few young people, but we need to work more on it because like there's only like 3 or 4 young people in our club and everybody else is old.
But it's kind of a trick, but it works well because everybody is interested in making photos.
I'll bring that up at the next meeting. And I brought that up at the last board meeting. I brought up about they were talking about to get people to what can we do to encourage more people to join? And I said, the elephant in the room is we're all old. How are we going to get the young people to come in?
Yeah.
The same kind of issue has come up in some like astronomy, astrophotography kind of groups that I've kind of interacted with a little ways. And in that conversation, one of the things that became interesting is like some of the folks who were more experienced, like they'd spent their life looking at the sky, and they really didn't like the fact that a lot of people coming in now will use, let's say, computer assisted tools in order to do astronomy and such, or um, the story that people would tell is that back in the day, for people who were interested in, let's say, amateur like shortwave radio, you had to know how to do Morse code first.
Oh yeah.
And so then a lot of folks just didn't see the point of doing Morse code anymore, but they were still interested in amateur radio. But until you kind of maybe revisit some of those things, you may not be a very inviting community for the new folks or the younger folks that you are wanting to attract. And it would be interesting to think about that in terms of photography along the lines that, well, a lot of young folks are really interested in analog photography more so than digital,
Yeah.
or they might be equally interested in using cameras such as their phone cameras and Instagram or social media kind of film. And a lot of that stuff sometimes is not seen as the kind of topic that some folks who are longer in this work are wanting to pursue. So that there's some barriers that people have to join into those conversations.
Yeah, ham radio, you used to learn Morse code before you can get your license.
Yeah. Which is, for licensure and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that probably makes a lot of good sense, but it's one of those, like, there are lots of kind of gateways that people who are in hobbies kind of guard in terms of letting people into their community too. So I think sometimes that becomes an issue for young folks.
Yeah, the astronomy clubs, though. I mean, the guy in my photography club does a lot of astronomy. He does astrophotography, and he does a lot of computer assisted stuff. He has like sky trackers and all these kind of things. So he gets some really great shots. And I visited an astronomy club in St. Louis. It was southwest of St. Louis, and there's a field where it's reasonably dark sky, and they have a spider web of sidewalks. And they got one main big telescope in the middle that's sort of inside of a shed that you can pull back the ceiling to get the telescope out. And then they have all these pods that everybody can set up their own telescopes on those the various pods. And then they would invite people to come out and see what do you want to see? You want to see the rings of Saturn? You want to see Jupiter's moons or whatever it might be. So they had a very good turnout with people showing up like that, not so much to join the club, but they were just, people were dying for somebody to look at their
Outreach.
images, because if you're an amateur photography, astronomer, and you don't do photography, the only thing you do is look through your telescope and you want, hey, everybody look through my telescope. But when you were talking about how you think about, like when I was talking about, you say look for the where are the sunbeams hitting and things like that to try to find interesting images. And I've read a few techniques about try to get your craft together because maybe you're just not in the mood. And one thing that worked for me, and I haven't done it in a long time, is if you look around for different letters of the alphabet. So look for A's in the trees or
Yeah.
something, or the buildings. You just start looking for words, and then you start. Not that you want to shoot those things, but when you get your brain being used in a different way, in a more creative way. We start using your imagination to find these patterns, and then you'll see something. Then, aha! This will be a great shot.
Yeah.
Those are all kind of, to me at least, I think they're motivational, but they're also exercises in seeing.
Yeah.
So if you kind of attend to how you look as you're going through the world and you pay attention and you look for patterns, you look for light, you look for letters, you look for doorknobs, whatever it is, I think that just kind of tunes your attention in ways that can be very productive for photography.
Yeah, I've done that before as well, looking for only one color or
Yeah.
or
Today
only
is red.
yeah or leading lines, only leading lines, or how you say the front, the middle, and the back.
Yeah.
It could be
The three
one photo.
layers. Yeah. Sometimes people get mixed up. Sometimes they don't really get mixed up. Some people hear it the wrong way. I think particularly in Europe, they talk about the rule of threes,
Mhm.
and they're automatically thinking about talking about the rule of thirds. No, they're talking about the three layers of foreground, midground, and background.
Yeah.
Yeah, but pay attention to that stuff.
It's quite difficult uh, to have a meaningful photo with all the three inside, and you first maybe have to do only the front, and then the middle, and then the back, and then mix it together.
But you can also eliminate the front and the back. So if you're shooting a storefront, for example, well, I do a lot of storefronts, so you don't really have a foreground so much at all. Maybe there might be a little piece of sidewalk at the beginning, but generally it's just a two-dimensional plane that you're capturing. And why I'm fascinated by that stuff, I have no idea. When I find myself drawn to it,
But you learn to think what you want in the picture, huh?
yeah.
Very much so.
And then also you're talking about photos that have a story. A lot of people think a photograph has to have a story, which, yeah, a photo with a story is great. There's a good story, that's a big boost on the value of the photo. But I think you also have narrative, because story is a narrative, but it goes beyond just telling a story by the narrative. And that's how would you define a narrative of an image, like an abstract. What would be the narrative of an abstract, like an ICM thing or something like that?
In abstract, it's difficult to have a story, I think.
Yeah.
But there's a narrative. I argue that there's a narrative, though.
The narrative
What might that be?
could be, yeah. Narrative
Well, I
could
mean,
be.
your image this week, John, is a good example. I mean, the picture, beautifully shot picture of that drain pipe.
Yeah.
And, so one could say, well, what is the story there? And, I think one could construct something about, an old metal object that's been out there for a long time. I think just the geometry of it, the presentation of it was nice, was really nicely done. And
Not
now
really a story, I think. No,
but it comes together as a striking image. And so to me, that's quite often enough. And how you frame it, how you lay it out is part of what makes it aesthetically pleasing.
But you are right. It's not, you cannot tell a story with it. You can see light and you can see structures, but that's it.
But that's a
Yeah.
narrative, though. You have
You
the
cannot,
texture. You supply
yeah.
the texture. You supply the form. You can supply the light. So that's a narrative. It's communicating this image, and why is it compelling? Is because it's well composed.
But
And
in your story of this week, Teddy, about the three people, the
yeah,
photo that you showed us last week, there was no connection between the people.
that's
So
right.
there was no story, but it had really were three people in it with a triangle.
But
So
I would call that a narrative.
you
So
could say maybe everybody in his own world.
yeah,
But uh,
that could be
is
a
that
narrative.
is
Yeah,
that enough to tell a story? That is my question sometimes.
yeah. And I was intrigued recently. I was on a, I watched a video about architecture, and they were talking about the narrative of architecture, and it was a topic. It was the main chapter of this particular part of the video, but they never really said what the narrative of architecture was. So, but what would be the narrative of architecture? They were hinting around it. It was like the history of it, how old it was, how long did it take to build, and things like that. But that's not exactly what I was, because the art of architecture, what's the narrative? Because I find photographing architecture, there was definitely a narrative because of form. You have dynamism, you have contrast, and where your eyes go and things like that. There's an action of actually looking and examining, and for a reason. I would call that the narrative. Same thing with your pipe.
Yeah, but
Oh, go
it's
ahead.
difficult uh, to tell somebody else something about what you want to show.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Because you tell me now, you understand what I was telling, but uh, for me, it's difficult keep to make a photo of something and then uh, tell the story only with the photo, not by words.
right. And
Well,
now, when you decided to take that photo, were you just walking down an alley or along the street and it caught your eye? How did you go about that?
No, I was making another photograph, and then I was ready, and I saw this pipe. So, and then I was thinking, well, this could be something as well. And then I paid attention to it, and then, well, just two photos and ready. But it was the light and the structure in the right time.
Oh, yeah, the lighting was perfect. Yes.
mhm.
Like almost like a textbook. Here's how lighting from 45 degrees is coming along the wall.
Yeah.
Well, and there was a comment on the garden picture submitted that is a relative here or relevant here, I think, and someone is saying, well, this one element in the picture made it harder to read your photo, and I think that apart from narrative or story, there are ways in which something's been composed in terms of the framing, the lighting, etc., that can help people who are looking at your image to know what you want them to look at. So, sometimes you look at an image, you don't know what to look at, you don't know what the subject is, you don't know, you might not ever know the intention of the photographer, but there can be some good visual ways in which you lay it out to make it possible for people to see what you're wanting them to look at with focus, with framing, with light, things of that sort.
Sometimes with street photography, sometimes I take out people
Yeah.
because there are too many people or they are double. And so one is here and one is behind, and then
Mhm.
it's just the background is spoiled more or less,
Yeah,
and then I try to take it out.
Yeah, you
yeah.
get somebody walking, a person that's taking up a lot of the frame, and you got like a Nike shirt, so you get text on that shirt. That's even worse because
Yeah,
the text, your eye is automatically drawn to the text.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like I have a picture in this week that's of basically it's a shadow play where it's light shining through a window with some Chinese characters for a travel agency. And I can't explain to anyone why or a story behind it or why I took it other than I found the way the shadows were splayed on surfaces, the surface of a staircase, visually interesting. And so for me, that's what got me taking the shot. So I can't construct anything really dramatic around that in terms of anything else, other than having framed it in a particular way with the distortion of some diffraction because I'm shooting through blinds and the details on a staircase that's quite filthy, but in some interesting ways of texture. And that's enough for me to have wanted to take the picture. So
But is it
I wouldn't
enough?
hang it on my wall though.
Is it enough for another one that is telling a story? That's you need to think about. If you put it on weekly, everybody thinks different of telling a story.
Yeah.
And so, or if you put it somewhere else, uh, uh, they are thinking maybe different. So it depends on where you put it as well.
Absolutely. And I think you've said before, Teddy, like, so a picture of a bee, what's the story there?
Yes, well, that's the narrative. There's no story. I mean, you could say a story.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
it's a
yeah.
bee. It's pollinating, it's buzzing around. But, or like
But
the
could
story of a,
a narrative, you say actually, a narrative could be the story.
yeah. And I was also going to say, I'm trying to get the picture up here. Come on. Now my internet's bogging down just a bit. With um, Jeff, your photo, get this up here because we were talking the shadow. I mean, that's what's important. Of course, if you have a very pretty model, so that's it. There we go. But it's almost like the wall, the shadow is like reaching out for her, but her face looking away from it. So you have there's a dynamic element to it that that's not really a story, but you have a feeling. Like, is that an embrace or a threatening motion or something like that?
And initially to me, it tied the structure together between the two edges. And I think the first thing that led to that framing was the plant behind or to the right had some similar colors to the dress of the subject on the left. And but I think the most important point is that that wasn't my shoot. That was someone else's. But the structure of what's in the frame there had it had to be both because I tried it without, but it looked a bit ominous just having that shadow reaching out without the bush. So I kept it in. But the point again about, take the line out because it just introduces negative space, which I think was your point, and then someone else saying, well, that confused how I should read this. So, going back to an abstract or any image, mundane or otherwise, there are clues that you can put in an image and how you framed it, how you focused, how you've exposed it that will give clues to your viewer in terms of what you want them to do, what you would hope they would do. Whether they'll do it or not is completely their choice.
And you want to make it stronger for them. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. And also her dangly hair and the shadows. I mean, the tree limb shadows are kind of echo that as well. So I think that adds to the and her fan adds to it. Now, why does that add to it? I don't know, but I think that helps balance her posture against this shadowy wall.
Yeah. The other thing I find myself doing in post is I'm often moving from, and I think this one is the case, from a 4:3 to a 16:9, because I'm sometimes wanting more of a panorama, but one image only. Like I don't shoot panoramas hardly at all. But I'm trying to use the aspect ratio in a way to like if it's like a wide shot, full dimension, full frame, that's one thing, but it's quite often I'm finding this, like, especially like for, I don't know, some of the flower shots and everything, I like the wider 16:9 format for whatever reason.
I do too. Yeah, I kind of whatever reason. I like the old Cinerama. I like to
Yeah.
spread out.
And sometimes in a photo, the upper part or the lower part isn't so interesting, and therefore you make it 69.
Yeah.
Well, that 69 was that's they decided to come up with that with HDTV, so that's what they thought would be the most pleasing viewpoint for people to have things like images like that up on your living room. So, okay, we're already after 3 o'clock. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to be able to do this next week as well. One hang up is not with me doing this, but I'm running out of disk space on my Zoom thing. So I copy this. I'm recording this to my computer. So I'm going to start posting the photos on YouTube.
Oh, you mean the videos?
Yeah, the videos on YouTube.
Do you think people are watching the videos? Is it?
Every now and then somebody will say something about it, but you know what? They're available.
Yeah.
So why the heck not?
Fair enough. It might be interesting to see if there's another time to try to attract some
Yeah.
additional folks.
Yeah, Ski mentioned he couldn't do it other than on a weekday. And then I said, okay, well, I'll try to do that. And he says, well, he's still too busy to do it. But it would be nice to, probably figure out another time. And here we also talk, we're spread out all over the place. It's even worse for some people. I mean, Fernando, he's clear over in Hawaii, like practically halfway around it. So that just makes it more difficult. And then you have the language barrier. Not everybody's as bilingual as certain people. So anyway, I'm going to get off of here. I will post the video.
Enjoy the rest of the day.
It was great talking to you guys. Yeah.
Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.